Tamara had always kept her head down at the luxurious five-star hotel. She had learned early that silence was survival in this world of wealth and power, where the air smelled of money and privilege, and the staff was often overlooked. She worked tirelessly, cleaning rooms, making beds, and ensuring that everything gleamed with perfection. Her job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. For Tamara, that was enough. Yet, tonight was different. Tonight, she would no longer be invisible. The evening had started like any other. The hotel was buzzing with high-end guests, the kind who would never notice the workers behind the scenes. The gleaming marble floors reflected the light from the chandeliers above, and the grand lobby was alive with laughter and chatter. Tamara walked through the halls with a cart of cleaning supplies, her uniform neatly pressed, her face as composed as it could be in a world where she was constantly reminded of her place. Her shift had been long. The hotel had hosted a high-profile gala, and the staff had been scrambling to make sure everything went off without a hitch. Tamara, as usual, had been assigned to one of the VIP suites, the kind of room where only the elite ever stayed. She'd cleaned the bathroom, dusted the shelves, and made the bed with the same precision she always did. But tonight, as she finished the last touch and prepared to leave, she felt an unusual tension in the air. She turned the handle of the suite door, only to find it locked from the inside. The muffled sound of voices drifted through the door. It was then that she noticed the manager, Kevin, standing nearby, his eyes fixed on her with a cold stare. He was a tall, well-dressed man in his mid-40s, with a slicked-back hairdo and a demeanor that suggested he held the weight of the world on his shoulders. Tamara had always tried to avoid him, knowing that a brief encounter was never pleasant. But tonight, as the minutes dragged by, she felt the pressure building. Kevin was looking at her with something other than his usual indifference. It was disdain. "Tamara," he called out, his voice sharp. She turned slowly, unsure of what he would say next. "Yes, Mr. Kevin," she replied, trying to keep her tone neutral, not letting her guard slip. "You know the drill. Get out of here. This room is for important people, not people like you." The words hit her like a punch to the gut, but she forced herself not to react. She had been through worse in her life, hadn't she? She could take it. She would take it. Kevin's eyes narrowed, his smile turning into a thin, mocking line. He didn't even try to hide his contempt for her. "You think you're good enough to be in this hotel?" he sneered. "You think your kind belongs here? The guests wouldn't even look twice at you. You're nothing more than someone they step over on their way to luxury." Tamara felt her pulse quicken, but she remained silent, her heart hammering in her chest. She had heard people talk down to her before, had felt the sting of their words, but this was different. This wasn't just a sneer or an offhand comment. This was venom. She had worked for this hotel for over 2 years. She had been passed over for promotions, had watched her colleagues get recognition while she was left in the shadows, doing the dirty work that no one else wanted to do. And now, she was being humiliated in front of the very people she had served with nothing but dedication. Kevin stepped closer, his presence overpowering. "You should know your place," he continued, his voice low and menacing. "People like you don't belong in places like this." Tamara felt a surge of heat rise within her. Her hands clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. She had heard this kind of thing all her life, the subtle racism, the dismissiveness, the feeling of always being less than. But tonight, something inside her snapped. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but her mind was racing. Was she just going to stand there and take it? Was she really going to let him talk to her like this, let him make her feel small and insignificant? No. Not anymore. Without thinking, Tamara reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Kevin's eyes flickered toward it, a faint look of surprise crossing his face. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice rising slightly. "I'm calling security," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. I won't stand for this. Kevin's laugh was cold and mocking. Security? For what? You think anyone here will believe you? You think your word means anything in this hotel? His words hung in the air, thick with disdain. But Tamara's resolve was unwavering. She dialed the number for hotel security, her fingers shaking slightly as she pressed the buttons. As the phone rang, Kevin's eyes turned darker, his expression turning from arrogance to something more dangerous. He stepped forward again, this time blocking her from making the call. You're making a huge mistake, he growled, his voice low and threatening. But Tamara didn't flinch. She didn't back down. Instead, she pressed the button to end the call, her heart pounding, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. I'm done being your doormat, she said quietly. I'm done. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. Kevin stood there, his chest rising and falling with each breath, eyes locked on hers. Tamara could feel the weight of the situation, the tension crackling in the air like a storm waiting to break. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and walked out of the suite, her back straight, her steps sure. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay there any longer. The hallway felt unusually empty as she walked toward the staff exit, the silence surrounding her, broken only by the echo of her footsteps. She passed the grand lobby, the bustling guests oblivious to the moment that had just unfolded behind the walls. She passed the polished marble floors, the opulent chandeliers, the gleaming counters where the hotel's front desk staff smiled at guests as if they didn't have a care in the world. Tamara, however, was far from uncaring. She was furious, scared, and exhausted from being overlooked, from being silenced, from living in a world where she was nothing more than a shadow to those with money and power. But tonight, that had changed. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she didn't stop to check it. She had already made her decision. She didn't need to explain herself to anyone anymore. She was done. As she exited the hotel, stepping out into the cool night air, Tamara felt a strange sense of freedom. The weight of Kevin's words still hung heavy on her shoulders, but there was a spark within her now, a spark that hadn't been there before. She had stood up for herself, taken back some control, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had power. But little did she know, her actions that night would set off a chain of events that would change everything. The storm was just beginning. Tamara hadn't anticipated the weight of the decision she'd made when she walked out of that hotel. What felt like a moment of empowerment quickly began to feel like a growing weight pressing down on her chest. The cold night air was no relief, it seemed to intensify her anxiety. She wasn't sure what she expected to happen next, but she certainly wasn't prepared for what was to come. She found herself standing outside the grand entrance of the hotel, surrounded by the city's hum, but feeling entirely alone. The city lights flickered as the cars zoomed past. She had no idea where to go. No friends to turn to. No family to lean on. Her whole life had been wrapped up in her job at the hotel, and now that she had walked away, she felt as if she had nothing left. But she didn't regret it, not even for a second. She had stood up for herself. That was worth something, wasn't it? As she walked down the street, her mind raced. Should she go to the police? Tell someone about what had happened? She didn't even know what to say. She had no proof. Kevin's words had been cruel, but was it enough for a legal battle? Was she ready to fight against the very system she had served for so long? Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She flinched, pulling it out with trembling hands. The screen lit up, showing an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat. It could be someone from the hotel, Kevin, maybe, calling to apologize or threaten her further. Or maybe someone from security asking why she had left in the middle of her shift. She hesitated before answering. Hello? Her voice was shaky. Is this Tamara? A deep voice on the other end asked, sharp and direct. Yes, she replied, her heart racing in her chest. Who is this? Detective Laura Holden. I'm calling about the incident at the hotel tonight. She was furious, scared, and exhausted from being overlooked, from being silenced, from living in a world where she was nothing more than a shadow to those with money and power. But tonight, that had changed. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she didn't stop to check it. She had already made her decision. She didn't need to explain herself to anyone anymore. She was done. As she exited the hotel, stepping out into the cool night air, Tamara felt a strange sense of freedom. The weight of Kevin's words still hung heavy on her shoulders, but there was a spark within her now, a spark that hadn't been there before. She had stood up for herself, taken back some control, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had power. But little did she know, her actions that night would set off a chain of events that would change everything. The storm was just beginning. Tamara hadn't anticipated the weight of the decision she'd made when she walked out of that hotel. What felt like a moment of empowerment quickly began to feel like a growing weight pressing down on her chest. The cold night air was no relief, it seemed to intensify her anxiety. She wasn't sure what she expected to happen next, but she certainly wasn't prepared for what was to come. She found herself standing outside the grand entrance of the hotel, surrounded by the city's hum, but feeling entirely alone. The city lights flickered as the cars zoomed past. She had no idea where to go. No friends to turn to. No family to lean on. Her whole life had been wrapped up in her job at the hotel, and now that she had walked away, she felt as if she had nothing left. But she didn't regret it, not even for a second. She had stood up for herself. That was worth something, wasn't it? As she walked down the street, her mind raced. Should she go to the police? Tell someone about what had happened? She didn't even know what to say. She had no proof. Kevin's words had been cruel, but was it enough for a legal battle? Was she ready to fight against the very system she had served for so long? Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She flinched, pulling it out with trembling hands. The screen lit up, showing an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat. It could be someone from the hotel, Kevin, maybe, calling to apologize or threaten her further. Or maybe someone from security asking why she had left in the middle of her shift. She hesitated before answering. Hello? Her voice was shaky. Is this Tamara? A deep voice on the other end asked, sharp and direct. Yes, she replied, her heart racing in her chest. Who is this? Detective Laura Holden. I'm calling about the incident at the hotel tonight. Puzzles started to fall into place. Kevin's cruelty toward her, had it been more than just racism? Was there something darker at play? She had always brushed off his behavior as just another reflection of his arrogance, his sense of superiority. But now, hearing Holden's words, she couldn't ignore the chill creeping down her spine. Holden continued, her voice steady, but laced with urgency. We believe Kevin has been using his influence at the hotel to cover up his actions. He's managed to stay under the radar for a long time, but we're closing in. And your decision to walk away, to not stay silent, Tamara, that was your first act of defiance. We need you to help us take him down. Tamara's breath caught in her throat. But I don't know anything about this. I only wanted to leave. I didn't see anything. Holden held up a hand, silencing her. It's not about what you saw. It's about what you represent. You're a key witness, Tamara. You walked out when so many others stayed silent. You stood up to him. And that, she paused, that's the kind of strength we need right now. Tamara sat in stunned silence. She couldn't fathom what the detective was asking. She had barely thought through her own actions that night. She had been acting out of instinct, out of years of frustration, years of quietly enduring insults, racism, and discrimination. But now, those actions were being turned into something much bigger than she had imagined. "Tamara," Holden said, her voice softening. "I know this is a lot to take in. But you need to understand that we're going to need you to testify. Your statement could bring this man down. It could be the thing that stops him from hurting anyone else." Tamara felt the weight of the words settle into her chest. She had never imagined that her simple act of rebellion would turn into something so monumental. She had just walked away from a job she had grown to hate. But now, her life was tangled in a web of crime, betrayal, and a system that was far bigger and more dangerous than she could have ever known. Tamara sat in the small, sterile room of the police station, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The stark white walls pressed in on her, and she tried not to think about the events that had led her here. Detective Holden's words lingered in her mind, but no matter how hard she tried to make sense of them, they didn't feel real. Kevin, the manager who had tormented her for so long, was apparently involved in something far darker than she could have ever imagined. Bribery, exploitation, and even theft. He had been running a covert operation right under the noses of the very people who worked alongside him every day. Tamara had always known there was something off about the hotel, the way things never quite added up, the whispers among the staff that always seemed to be cut short when anyone higher up walked into the room. But the idea that Kevin was at the center of it all was something she couldn't wrap her head around. After Detective Holden left the room to confer with her team, Tamara sat in silence, her mind racing. She had always been the quiet one, the worker who kept her head down and stayed out of the drama. But now, by walking away from Kevin's cruel remarks, she had inadvertently put herself in the middle of something that could change her life forever. The detective had been clear, Tamara's testimony could be pivotal. But what did she really know? She had never witnessed any crimes, had never seen anything that could be used as evidence. Sure, she had been the target of Kevin's abuse, but that didn't mean she had anything that could bring him down. The door opened, and Detective Holden stepped back into the room. Her gaze was steady, focused, but there was a hint of sympathy in her eyes. She pulled a chair from the corner and sat across from Tamara. "We've been digging into Kevin's past," Holden began. "It's not pretty." Tamara tensed. "What do you mean?" Holden took a deep breath. "Kevin isn't just some hotel manager with a bad attitude. We've uncovered records from several women who worked with him in the past, and the story is the same every time. He used his position of power to manipulate and intimidate them into silence." Tamara's stomach churned. He never did anything like that to me. He was just cruel. But I never thought. That's the thing, Holden interrupted. Kevin knows how to hide behind a facade. He's charming when he needs to be. He knows how to manipulate people into doing what he wants. He's been playing this game for a long time. Tamara felt a chill crawl up her spine. The man who had humiliated her, who had made her feel small for so long, was capable of much worse than she could have imagined. She had thought it was just his personal vendetta against her. But now, it seemed like he had been using his power to exploit others for years. "We've also managed to trace some financial records," Holden continued, her voice low. "There are large sums of money being funneled through various accounts. Some of it is tied to a series of illegal transactions that go way beyond hotel operations." "Illegal?" Tamara whispered. "What kind of transactions?" Holden hesitated before answering. "We think Kevin's been involved in money laundering, using the hotel as a front for his operations. He's been moving large amounts of money through the business, hiding it behind fake accounts, all while keeping his employees in the dark." Tamara's head spun. Money laundering? She had never thought about anything like that happening right under her nose. She was just a housekeeper. What did she know about illegal activities? But as she replayed her memories of the hotel, the late-night meetings with mysterious guests, the secrecy surrounding certain transactions, she began to see the cracks in the facade. I had no idea, she said quietly, her voice shaky. But why me? Why did he target me? Holden leaned in, her expression softening. You weren't the only one, Tamara. There were others before you. Kevin has a pattern. He preys on those he perceives as weaker, those who have no voice. And when you walked away from him last night, you took that power away from him. You're the first person to stand up to him in a long time, and that makes you dangerous to him. We think that's why he's been so aggressive with you. Tamara's mind reeled as the pieces began to fall into place. Kevin's cruelty, his constant attempts to belittle her, he had been trying to break her down, keep her quiet, keep her in her place. But now, she was no longer the quiet housekeeper. She was the person who had dared to challenge him, the person who had walked away when everyone else stayed silent. And she had no idea how much danger that had placed her in. I don't know if I can do this, Tamara said, her voice cracking. I don't know if I can testify. I've never done anything like this before. Holden's eyes softened. Tamara, I understand this is overwhelming. But you're not alone in this. We're building a case against Kevin, and your testimony could be the final piece we need. We just need you to tell us what you know. Every detail, no matter how small. Tamara swallowed hard. She didn't know if she was ready for this. She had always kept to herself, never rocking the boat. But now, with everything she had learned, she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. She had seen Kevin for what he was, a cruel man using his position to hurt others. And if she didn't do something, how many others would he continue to destroy? Okay, she said, her voice steadying. I'll help. I'll testify. But what happens now? Holden nodded. We'll need you to come with us, to make a formal statement. We're going to get the evidence we need to take him down. And once we do, he won't be able to hurt anyone else again. Tamara took a deep breath, trying to steady the nervous energy swirling inside her. She had taken the first step by walking away from Kevin. Now, she was about to take another, one that could change her life forever. As Holden stood to lead her out of the room, Tamara's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message from an unknown number. She felt her heart skip a beat as she read the short, chilling message. You should have stayed silent. You have no idea what you've just gotten yourself into. The text was signed only with a single initial, K. The words felt like a punch to her gut. Kevin knew. He was on to her. Is something wrong? Holden asked, noticing the look on Tamara's face. Tamara's hands shook as she put the phone back in her pocket. She didn't want to show fear. Not now. Not when she was so close to bringing him down. But the message was clear. Kevin wasn't going to let her go without a fight. Tamara couldn't shake the feeling of unease as she walked out of the police precinct. The message from Kevin, just a few words, hung in her mind like a dark cloud. She had made her decision. She had agreed to testify, to bring down Kevin and expose his crimes. But now, in the quiet hours of the evening, as she stepped into the dimming city streets, it felt like the weight of that decision was pressing down on her chest. Kevin knew. He had sent her a message. The K at the end. He was on to her. But Tamara couldn't afford to back down now. She had seen what he was capable of. She had felt his cruelty firsthand. She knew that if she stayed silent, if she allowed him to intimidate her into inaction, there would be more victims. More women who would suffer the way she had. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She pulled it out quickly, already dreading what might be waiting for her on the screen. But when she saw the message, her heart dropped. It wasn't from Kevin. It was from a number she didn't recognize. Tamara, we need to talk. Meet me at the usual place. It's important. Laura. Laura. Tamara's pulse quickened. Laura was a friend from the hotel, someone who had worked in the kitchen with her. They had kept their distance for a while after some awkward moments at work, but Tamara couldn't remember ever having a conversation with Laura about anything particularly important. Why was she reaching out now? And why the urgency? But there was no time to waste thinking. The detective, Laura Holden, had been clear. They needed her testimony, and the sooner she could contribute to the case, the better. Maybe Laura had information that could help. Tamara glanced at the sky. Dark clouds were gathering, hinting at a coming storm. She knew the streets weren't safe at night, especially in this part of the city, but she didn't want to waste time. If she was going to be part of this, if she was going to face whatever Kevin had planned, she needed to move fast. She typed a quick reply. Okay. Where? The response came almost immediately. Behind the old diner on 5th, don't tell anyone. Come alone. Tamara's heart raced as she read the message. It was too risky. She'd been told to stay under the radar. But the urgency in Laura's words spoke volumes. She had to go. The streets were eerily empty as Tamara walked toward 5th Avenue. The glow of streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement, and she could feel the chill in the air creeping under her jacket. The thought of Kevin's threat lingered in her mind, but it didn't stop her from walking. She couldn't afford to be afraid, not now. She reached the diner, an old, run-down establishment that had long since fallen out of favor with the locals. The flickering neon sign outside buzzed weakly, and the windows were clouded with years of grime. No one was inside, as far as Tamara could tell. It was the perfect place for a secret meeting. She stepped around the back of the diner and saw Laura standing near the trash bins, her figure outlined against the dim light from a flickering street lamp. Laura looked over her shoulder as Tamara approached, her face a mixture of concern and urgency. You came, Laura said quietly. Her voice held an edge, like she was trying to sound calm but was clearly anxious. Tamara gave a small nod, her heart thumping in her chest. You said it was important. What's going on? Laura looked around, ensuring no one was nearby before she spoke again. I'm in trouble, Tamara. We all are. Tamara felt a chill crawl up her spine. What are you talking about? What do you mean, we all are? I know what you're doing, Laura said, stepping closer. I know you're planning to testify against Kevin. But you need to understand something, this goes much deeper than you think. Tamara's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? How could it go deeper? I can't explain everything right now, Laura said, glancing nervously over her shoulder again. But Kevin isn't just working alone. He's connected to something much bigger. There are people involved who you don't even want to mess with. I'm talking about people who will do anything to keep their secrets hidden. Tamara's mind raced. What are you saying? Are you involved in this too? No, Laura said quickly. But I've seen things, heard things. Kevin, he's not just a corrupt manager. He's part of an organized operation. It's been going on for years. Money laundering, human trafficking, drug smuggling. He's just a small piece of the puzzle. Tamara stood frozen. The words seemed impossible to process. The Kevin she knew, arrogant, cruel, but still a hotel manager, was now tied to things that were so much darker than she could have ever imagined. Money laundering? Human trafficking? Drugs? How do you know all this? Tamara asked, her voice trembling. Laura took a deep breath, then leaned in closer, lowering her voice. Because I've seen the deals. The handoffs. And I'm pretty sure Kevin was using the hotel to cover up some of it. People come in and out, paying cash, slipping through unnoticed. No one asks questions. But I've seen enough to know that there are people involved who aren't afraid to hurt others to keep this quiet. Tamara felt like the ground was shifting beneath her. The world she thought she knew, her safe little job at the hotel, the regular, routine life she had kept, was crumbling around her. She had walked away from Kevin, thinking she had simply stood up for herself. But now, the weight of the situation hit her all at once. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. Laura hesitated, glancing around nervously again. "I don't know how long I'll be safe. I've been trying to collect evidence, but they're on to me. I'm getting out of here, tonight. But you need to make sure you're careful. The people Kevin works with, they're dangerous. If they think you're getting too close to the truth, they won't hesitate to come after you. You need to protect yourself." Tamara's head was spinning. She had always thought she was just another employee, invisible to the powers that controlled the hotel. But now, she realized she had unknowingly been a part of something much bigger. Kevin wasn't just a manager, he was part of a system that involved dangerous criminals. "Laura," Tamara said, her voice shaking, "what should I do now? What's my next move?" Laura looked her dead in the eye, her face serious. "You have to be smart. You have to stay one step ahead of them. If you're going to testify, do it quietly. Don't trust anyone at the hotel. Kevin's not the only one you have to worry about. And if you need to disappear for a while, do it. Just make sure you're safe." Before Tamara could respond, Laura turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Tamara standing alone in the cold, the weight of the truth pressing heavily on her chest. Tamara stood in the cold, her heart racing, her mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. Laura had just disappeared into the darkness, leaving her standing behind the old diner, the weight of her words echoing in her mind. The hotel. Kevin. Money laundering, human trafficking, and drug smuggling. The realization was staggering. She had never imagined, in her wildest dreams, that her life would become so entangled with criminal operations, or that her decision to stand up to Kevin would put her squarely in the crosshairs of people who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. What had she gotten herself into? Her phone buzzed again, and for a moment, she froze. But then, she pulled it from her pocket, dreading what might be waiting for her. She had already received the warning from Kevin. Was this another threat? The text on her screen, however, was from Detective Holden. "Meet me at the safe house. Now. Don't trust anyone." Tamara's hands shook as she read the message. The urgency in Holden's words sent a chill down her spine. If Holden was telling her not to trust anyone, it meant something had changed. Someone, maybe even people she knew, were no longer trustworthy. She glanced around the empty street, her breath clouding in the cold air. She couldn't wait any longer. Her body moved on autopilot, and she started walking toward the safe house, the one place where she hoped she would be safe, at least for a while. The safe house was an old, inconspicuous apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't much to look at, its gray, weathered exterior blended in with the rest of the neighborhood. The windows were covered with blackout blinds, and there were no signs of life on the street. It was as if the building existed in isolation, hidden in plain sight. Tamara arrived at the building's door, feeling a knot form in her stomach. She had been here once before, but now it felt different. This wasn't just a place for protection, it was where everything was about to change. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding in her chest. A few moments later, Holden opened the door, her expression grim, her eyes scanning the street. Before ushering Tamara inside. "Come in quickly," Holden said, her voice low and urgent. "We don't have much time." Tamara stepped inside and immediately felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The safe house wasn't much, just a small, sparsely furnished apartment with a few chairs, a kitchen, and a small stack of documents on the table. But what caught her attention was the look on Holden's face. This wasn't the usual calm, collected detective she had come to know. Something was wrong. "What's going on?" Tamara asked, her voice shaking. You said not to trust anyone. Holden closed the door behind her, locking it with a soft click. She took a deep breath before speaking. There's something you need to know, Tamara. Something I didn't want to say before, but I have to now. Tamara's stomach churned. What do you mean? What's happening? Holden glanced at the stack of papers on the table. We've been looking into Kevin and his associates. But there's more to it than we thought. This isn't just a case of a corrupt manager running a small scam. Kevin's been working with people much higher up the chain. People with a lot of power. Tamara's blood ran cold. Who? People connected to the city's criminal underworld, Holden said, her voice barely above a whisper. But there's one more thing. One of your co-workers, someone you trust, is involved. They've been feeding information to Kevin's network, and they know everything about you. Tamara felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. What? Who? Holden hesitated. I can't say yet. We're still investigating. But I need you to stay here for the time being. We can't risk you going back to the hotel. Not until we figure out who's behind this. Tamara's mind raced. A coworker. Someone she knew. The thought made her feel nauseous. She had always kept to herself at work, tried to avoid drama. Who could it be? And how had they found out about her? I don't understand, Tamara said, her voice trembling. How could this happen? How could someone I know be involved in all of this? Holden sat down at the table, her face tense. It's complicated. Kevin's been building an operation over the years, using the hotel as a front. But he's not the only one involved. There are several people working for him, people with connections all over the city. And they'll do whatever it takes to keep their secrets safe. Tamara felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. So, what now? What do we do? I can't just hide here forever. Holden looked at her seriously. No, you can't. But for now, we need to be cautious. We need to find out who's working with Kevin. And we need to find a way to expose the whole network. If we move too quickly, we risk blowing everything. The silence between them was thick with tension. Tamara didn't know how long they could keep hiding, how long they could play this dangerous game. She had made the decision to speak up, to stand up to Kevin. But now, the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. Just then, there was a loud knock at the door. Tamara's heart leapt in her chest. Holden froze, her eyes narrowing. She gestured for Tamara to stay silent, then moved toward the door. Her hand hovered over the handle, as if weighing her options. Who is it? Holden called out, her voice steady but with an edge of suspicion. There was no response. Holden's face hardened, and she motioned for Tamara to stay back. She slowly peered through the peephole, her body tense. After a long pause, she turned back to Tamara, her expression unreadable. It's just the delivery, Holden said, but there was an uncertainty in her voice that Tamara didn't miss. Stay here. I'll check it. Tamara nodded, her mind racing. As Holden opened the door, Tamara's nerves were on high alert. Something about this didn't feel right. Holden stepped out into the hallway, her hand still on the door. Tamara could hear her muffled conversation with someone, but she couldn't make out the words. Then, there was a loud crash. Tamara's heart skipped a beat as she rushed to the door. She didn't know what was happening, but the sound of struggle was unmistakable. Panic surged through her veins. She had no idea what was going on, but she knew one thing for sure, the danger had just escalated. Tamara stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as the sound of struggle echoed through the safe house. She moved to the door, her hands trembling as she reached for the handle. What was happening? Why had there been that crash? Holden had stepped out just a moment ago. Now, there was silence, eerily so. She cautiously opened the door and peered into the hallway. The air was thick with tension, her senses on high alert. Her thoughts raced. What if they'd found her? What if they'd finally caught up to Holden? Holden? Tamara whispered, stepping into the hall. She felt as though her legs could give out at any moment. The silence was oppressive, and for a moment, she wasn't sure what to expect. A faint sound reached her ears, and she turned toward the stairs that led up to the building's second floor. There was movement, a shadow slipping into a doorway. Without thinking, she hurried up the stairs, her pulse quickening with each step. "Holden," she called again, her voice wavering slightly. She didn't know if it was smart to call out, but her instinct told her something was wrong. The detective hadn't come back, and the unsettling quiet was too much to ignore. Tamara reached the top of the stairs and stopped in her tracks. She saw Holden, lying on the floor in the hallway, her body twisted in an unnatural position, blood staining the floor around her. "Holden!" Tamara cried, rushing to her side. She knelt down beside the detective, her hands shaking as she checked for signs of life. There was no pulse. No breath. Holden was gone. Tamara's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit her. The detective had been killed. Whoever had done this was close, and they weren't stopping at anything. She was no longer just in danger, she was the target now. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She looked around, but there were no signs of an intruder, no evidence of a struggle beyond what had happened to Holden. She wasn't sure how much time she had left, but she knew she couldn't afford to waste it. If someone was after her, they'd come for her next. Tamara's mind flashed back to everything she had learned about Kevin and his associates. The threats. The warnings. The people connected to the hotel and the illegal operations that ran behind the scenes. It all made sense now. Holden's words about not trusting anyone, the fact that Tamara had been unknowingly involved in something far bigger than she had ever realized. She stood up, her mind made up. There was only one thing left to do, take the fight to them. She gathered her things in a daze, her hands moving almost automatically. The pain of Holden's death hadn't fully settled in, but there was no time to grieve. She couldn't afford to be weak. Not now. She had to survive. She had to finish what she had started. Tamara looked around the small, empty apartment, searching for something that could help her. Anything. The detective had kept a stash of papers, files, and a few weapons tucked away in a drawer. But it wasn't the weapons that caught Tamara's attention. It was the files, the evidence. Tamara pulled them out and started sorting through them quickly. They were organized, methodical. There were photos, reports, and detailed notes on Kevin's operation. Money transfers. Names of people involved. And, most importantly, the connections between the hotel and the higher-ups, powerful figures who had been laundering money, trafficking women, and smuggling drugs through the city. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her. This wasn't just a hotel manager with a few shady dealings. Kevin was a part of a vast network of criminals, people who controlled everything from drug trades to human trafficking rings. If she exposed this, the ripple effect would be enormous. But exposing it also meant her life was at risk. And she couldn't back out now. Tamara took the files, tucked them into her bag, and made her way out of the building. The sounds of the city outside felt distant, muffled by the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She didn't know where she was going yet, just that she couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. She needed a plan. She was halfway down the street when she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. Her breath caught in her throat. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Someone was following her. She quickened her pace, glancing over her shoulder. She didn't see anyone, but she could feel them. She knew she wasn't imagining it. Tamara ducked into an alley, hoping to lose whoever was on her tail. Her heart pounded as she moved quickly, her thoughts racing. Who could it be? Kevin's men? Or someone else who had learned of her intentions to testify? Maybe it was someone from the hotel, a coworker, someone who had been feeding information to the criminals. She turned sharply at a corner, then quickly doubled back, moving silently into the shadows. She waited, holding her breath, straining her ears for any sound that would tell her whether she was being followed. A few moments later, the figure appeared, a man, walking slowly but with purpose. Tamara didn't recognize him, but she could feel the danger in the air. She had to move. She started to back away, but her foot caught on something, a metal trash can lid, and she stumbled, the noise loud in the quiet night. The man turned, spotting her immediately. "Tamara," he said with a low voice, stepping forward. She froze. "How do you know my name?" Tamara demanded, her voice shaky. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We've been keeping an eye on you. Kevin's not happy with your little rebellion." Tamara's heart raced. It was one of Kevin's men. She was cornered. "I suggest you come with me," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Kevin's waiting." Tamara's mind raced. There was no way she could go with him. She knew what would happen if she did. She couldn't go back to Kevin. She had to make a choice. The risk was too high. Suddenly, the man lunged at her, grabbing her arm. Without thinking, Tamara kicked him in the knee and shoved him away with every ounce of strength she had left. The man grunted in pain, but he didn't let go. He lunged again, grabbing her by the throat. "Let go of me!" Tamara screamed, using every bit of energy to free herself. But the man was stronger. His grip tightened, and she felt herself losing air. Desperation surged through her. She couldn't let him take her. Not after everything she had been through. Not when she was so close. With a surge of adrenaline, Tamara brought her knee up, connecting with his groin. The man recoiled, releasing his grip on her neck, and she broke free, gasping for air. Without looking back, Tamara ran. Tamara ran through the narrow streets, her breath ragged, her heart pounding. She could hear the man's footsteps behind her, getting closer, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she was so close to everything she had fought for. She had no plan, no safe haven, only the instinct to survive and to expose the truth. She turned another corner, breathless, but her vision was clear. She had learned enough. Holden's death, the dark secrets of the hotel, Kevin's operations, it was all part of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. And she couldn't back down. Not now. Tamara stumbled into the city's bustling center, where people moved with no care, too absorbed in their own lives to notice the tension in the air. She knew she had to get the information out, had to make sure Kevin and his associates were exposed before they could hurt anyone else. She pulled out her phone, ignoring the constant ringing of messages and notifications. There was only one person left who could help her. Detective Holden had trusted her with the evidence, and now it was her turn to do what was right. Tamara texted the one person who could make a difference, the FBI agent she had met months earlier, someone outside of the web Kevin had created. The message was simple. Everything. The hotel. The operation. Kevin's network. "I'll meet you at the docks in 30 minutes. It's all there." She hit send, then ran toward the waterfront. The docks were isolated, the perfect place for a final confrontation. As she arrived, she saw the familiar silhouette of Agent Simmons standing near the water's edge. He was waiting, his posture tense, as if expecting something dangerous. The night sky loomed over them, dark clouds reflecting the stillness of the water. Tamara walked toward him, her heart still racing. She handed him the folder with everything, photos, documents, the evidence that could bring down an entire network of criminals. "This is it," she said, her voice steady, but the weight of what she had just been through was clear in her eyes. This is everything Holden worked for. This is everything that will stop Kevin and the rest of them. Agent Simmons looked at her, his face unreadable. I've seen it. You did good. But you're going to be safe now. It's over. For a brief moment, Tamara felt a rush of relief. The truth was finally out. The people behind the criminal network would be held accountable. And she had played a part in it. But as the adrenaline faded, the exhaustion of everything she had endured settled in. I never wanted any of this, she said softly, looking out at the dark water. Simmons nodded. None of us do. But sometimes, you have to stand up for what's right, even if it means risking everything. Tamara looked at him, and for the first time, she understood. The fight wasn't just about surviving, it was about changing the world, piece by piece. Sometimes, it took one person to shine a light in the darkness. And though the fight was over, her journey wasn't. She had discovered that the power to change things didn't lie in the hands of the powerful or the rich. It lay in the hearts of people who were willing to risk everything for what was right. It was about courage, standing up when the world was silent, and fighting for justice, no matter the cost. Tamara had learned this lesson the hard way. But she had learned it nonetheless. And she would never be the same again.